She left me for a man who could touch the clouds, and everyone said it was romantic. The pilot, the wings, the glamour of flight. It all made sense to them. What they didn't see was the silence that followed, the way her laughter stopped echoing through my house the moment she walked out. I didn't chase her. I didn't beg her to stay. Instead, I poured myself a drink, looked at the flight number she was on, and smiled. Because while she was chasing altitude, I was learning ownership. And when a man like me gets left for a pilot, he doesn't cry. He buys the sky. Her name was Ava. For 7 years, she'd been the center of a life I've built from scratch. The long nights, the deals, the constant motion of my world condensed into our quiet apartment overlooking the city. I thought she loved the stability I gave her, the calm after years of chaos in her own life. But maybe stability was just another word for boredom in her dictionary. She used to tell me that I didn't live, that my world was too predictable. Maybe she was right, because when Liam came along, predictability became the enemy she couldn't stand to sleep beside. Liam was everything I wasn't: loud, charming, endlessly visible. He wore his ambition like a uniform long before he earned one. And Ava, with her taste for stories that sparkled, fell right into his orbit. I could see it coming months before she did. The late replies, the half smiles when she mentioned someone interesting from her brand's new campaign. He was the face of that campaign, the man who flies. A walking metaphor for escape. And I suppose that's what she wanted most. Escape. Not from me, but from the quiet life she mistook for stagnation. When she told me she was leaving, it was a Tuesday evening. The sky outside was painted the same color as the gin in her glass, cold and clear. She didn't cry, didn't apologize. She just said it like a weather report. "I'm leaving, Ethan. You deserve someone who wants what you want." I remember staring at her, not angry, not even sad, just curious. "And what is it I want, Ava?" She hesitated, eyes flicking to the floor. "Control," she said. "You want everything under your control, even love." She wasn't wrong. I'd built my life on control, data, precision, calculated risk. I ran a company that specialized in restructuring distressed assets, turning chaos into clarity. And maybe, in a way, I'd treated her the same. She came into my life messy and brilliant, and I organized her chaos until she could afford to leave it behind. I gave her calm, and she called it cage. The night she left, she kissed me on the cheek like you'd thank a host after a good dinner. "I hope you find peace," she said, as if peace wasn't something I already had in abundance. I watched her roll her suitcase out of the apartment and into the waiting cab. The sound of the door clicking shut was softer than I expected, but it carried a finality that I'd been anticipating for months. The next morning, the world went on exactly as it always had. My coffee brewed, my calendar filled, my team emailed. Nothing in the external world had changed, but something inside me had, something subtle and irreversible. I didn't feel the urge to call her, to check her social media, to ask mutual friends about her new life. I didn't need to. I'd already seen the ending to this kind of story before. The glamorous high followed by turbulence. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that her face appeared on my feed, radiant, effortless, standing beside Liam on a runway, his arm around her waist, his aviators reflecting the sunset. The caption read, "To New Horizons, airplane departure sparkles, dot." The comments were a parade of envy. "Power couple goals. Love above the clouds. So proud of you both." I stared at it for a long while, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical detachment. I'd seen that expression before, on executives right before they made a mistake they couldn't afford. The look of people convinced they were invincible. I knew that look because I used to wear it too. 3 nights later, I was at a dinner with my associate, Nor. She was sharp, efficient, and the only person who could read my silences without asking questions. We'd been reviewing a merger proposal when she looked up from her laptop. "You're distracted," she said. "Just thinking about leverage," I replied. Her brow arched. "Business or personal?" "In my world," I said, "there's no difference." Nur didn't press further. She didn't need to. We'd worked together long enough for her to sense when a storm was forming behind my calm. That night, as I sat in my office overlooking the sleeping city, the idea came to me. not as revenge, but as equilibrium. It wasn't about It was about the
Ava,
imbalance
not really.
she'd left behind, the quiet insult of being underestimated. The pilot represented everything I wasn't: visible, impulsive, celebrated. But the truth was simple: visibility doesn't equal power. Control does. So I opened my laptop, typed in 3 words, and hit enter. West Air Holdings, Investor Relations. West Air, the mid-tier regional airline Liam flew for. I'd heard of them before. They were struggling, as most airlines do, trapped between rising fuel costs and corporate vanity projects. Their valuation was laughably inflated by social campaigns that sold romance in the skies. Ironically, Ava herself had done one of their influencer promotions last year. The numbers didn't lie. It was an operation coasting on image, not infrastructure. I clicked through their quarterly reports. Deferred maintenance, overleverage, pending union negotiations. All the signs of turbulence hiding behind glossy branding. I leaned back in my chair, smiling for the first time in weeks. People fall for pilots because they look like they're in control of the sky. But what most don't realize is that every flight, every seat, every takeoff clearance depends on 100 people they'll never see. Pilots may fly the planes, but someone else decides where they fly, when they land, and who signs their paychecks. That someone was going to be me. The next few days blurred into motion. I called Noor, told her to quietly gather everything she could on West Air: capital structure, debt exposure, key shareholders. I wanted to know who really owned the wings Liam thought he controlled. She didn't ask why. She never did. By Friday, a file sat on my desk labeled WA Restructure Potential. Inside were charts, redline memos, and one detail that made everything click into place. 17% of West Air's debt was held by a private fund looking to exit before year-end. 17%, enough to start a whisper in the right rooms. That night, I stood on my balcony, city lights flickering below like circuitry, and thought about Ava. Not with longing, but with precision. She'd wanted a man who could take her places. She just never asked who decided which destinations existed. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about restoration, restoring balance where arrogance disrupted it. So I lifted my glass to the skyline and murmured to the empty air, "Fly high, Ava," because soon enough, every time he takes off, he'll be flying for me. The next morning, I sent the first email. The email I sent that morning was short, almost casual, the kind of message people skim on their phones before coffee. Subject: Strategic Alignment Inquiry. Good morning. I'm exploring potential interest in structured investments for select aviation assets before Q4. Regards, Ethan Cole. It went to one person, Nur Khan, my chief analyst and the only human alive who knew when my silence meant war. By noon, she'd replied with a list of names: private equity funds, distressed asset managers, 2 hedge partners we'd worked with before. Every one of them held a piece of West Air's financial engine. Within 48 hours, I was on a video call with Bryant Capital, the fund that owned that critical 17% of West Air's convertible debt. The managing director, an overconfident man with a yacht tan and a habit of interrupting himself, spoke in the language of tired optimism. West Air's positioned for a strong rebound, he said. Post-pandemic travel boom, influencer partnerships, great PR with their pilots. I'm aware, I cut in smoothly. That's why you're looking to exit. He froze for a moment, his mouth a half smile. We're exploring liquidity options. Translation, I said, you're bleeding quietly and hoping no one smells it. Silence. Then a chuckle. You've done your homework. I always do. By the end of the call, we had a non-binding term sheet. 3 weeks to due diligence, 6 to close. It wasn't about buying stock. It was about influence. The kind that seeps in before anyone notices a temperature change. For the first time since Ava left, I felt motion. Not the impulsive kind she'd chased, but controlled propulsion. My days became an elegant storm of meetings, legal reviews, and strategic whispers. Every night, I watched the flight tracker on my laptop. Not her flights, but West Air's network. Routes, delays, cancellations. Each red line on that map was an opportunity. Nur managed the numbers. I handled the people. Together, we began to shape the outline of something massive. "You're not just buying a company," she warned one night, sipping cold coffee across from me. "You're building a weapon." "Not a weapon," I said. "An ecosystem." She wasn't wrong. She met with Marcus Vale, a retired airline operations executive who'd spent 30 years watching CEOs destroy balance sheets with their egos. He spoke in metaphors of weather. "An airline's like a sky marriage," he said. "Everyone thinks they're flying the plane. In reality, you're all just trying not to crash together." I smiled. "Then maybe it's time for a new pilot." He had me over his glasses. "Or a new owner." We began accumulating quietly through shell holdings, small enough to avoid radar, consistent enough to raise questions only after it was too late. Every acquisition gave us a louder voice in the boardroom, and soon my name started circulating in circles that mattered. "Who's Cole?" they asked. "Tech guy? Venture fund? Some Silicon Valley angel?" Let them guess. Mystery is leverage. Meanwhile, the world kept spinning for Ava and her new life. Her social media blossomed with aerial photos, champagne flutes, and hashtags that tasted like altitude. Hashtag Captain Love, hashtag Above the Clouds, hashtag Fly Together. The algorithm adored them. So did the tabloids. To everyone else, they looked unstoppable. To me, they looked expensive. Every mile flown was debt. Every delay a press hit. Every maintenance deferral another hairline crack in the illusion of perfection. West Air's glamour was built on borrowed fuel, and I was about to start billing interest. The first domino fell at the annual Aviation Investors Dinner in Seattle. A room full of egos wrapped in tuxedos, toasting margins none of them understood. I attended anonymously, not as Ethan Cole, the investor, but as the guest of a partner fund. I watched the West Air CEO, Darren Chambers, on stage, selling his airline like a lifestyle brand. He spoke about romance in the skies, and I almost applauded the irony. Beside me, Noor whispered, "You're smiling like a man planning arson." "Correction," I murmured. "Renovation." When the speech ended, I approached Chambers at the bar. He was already half lit on compliments and bourbon. "Ethan Cole," I said, extending a hand. He blinked. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," I said, "but you will." I congratulated him on his pilot-centric marketing, his loyalty programs, his brand storytelling. I let him talk for 10 minutes before slipping the question that mattered. "So, tell me, Darren, what's your contingency for your maturing convertible debt next quarter?" His smile faltered. "We're exploring liquidity options." I finished for him the same words Bryant Capital had used. "Maybe we should explore them together." That was the moment I saw it. The flicker of recognition, the subtle panic of a man realizing the quiet stranger in front of him already held part of his future. In the weeks that followed, I moved fast. My lawyer structured a holding entity, Stratos Partners, LLC, designed to take incremental positions without tripping public thresholds. By the end of March, we controlled 23% of West Air's voting rights, directly or indirectly. When I walked into the boardroom for the first time, it wasn't as a hostile presence, but as a strategic advisor. They needed capital. I needed patience. It was a mutually beneficial illusion. During that first meeting, I kept my answers short. The directors were seasoned at posturing. They didn't notice the man at the end of the table collecting their tells. One was nervous about fleet upgrades. Another resented pilot unions. Every weakness was a line item. I spoke only once. You can't fix perception until you fix systems. And systems fail when pilots get paid for selfies instead of safety. A few eyebrows rose. I didn't care. The seed was planted. That evening, as I left the building, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Ava, are you doing this to prove something?" For a moment, I stood in the rain, the city lights smearing gold across the sidewalk. I typed back slowly. "No," to own what was already mine. She didn't reply. She never had much to say when confronted with consequences. By May, my influence was undeniable. The board brought me in to consult on operational efficiency. In truth, I ran the meetings. Nor compiled data models that exposed wasteful routes, underutilized aircraft, and absurd marketing expenses, including the six-figure campaign featuring none other than Captain Liam Brooks, the airline's newest social media darling. Cut it, I said. The marketing director protested. It's one of our most visible assets. Visibility doesn't equal profitability, I replied. Ground him from commercials and put him back in the cockpit where he belongs. The irony tasted better than bourbon. Word spread quickly through the corridors. The new investor didn't smile, didn't flirt, and he was changing everything. He calculated. Still, control wasn't complete. Chambers remained the figurehead. The press loved him, and the unions trusted him. For now, my play wasn't finished until the company itself bore my signature. To achieve that, I needed a trigger, an unavoidable storm that only I could navigate. It came sooner than expected. A delayed fuel shipment at LAX cascaded into system-wide chaos. Flights grounded, passengers furious, the media-feeding frenzy in full swing. By the time I reached headquarters, Chambers looked like a man already half-buried. "Ethan," he groaned, "the logistics team's overwhelmed. Move operations control under me for 72 hours, I said calmly. "I'll fix it." He hesitated. "That's not a request," I finished. He signed the authorization. In 48 hours, we rerouted crews, negotiated fuel loans, and restored 96% of flights. The press called it a miraculous recovery led by an anonymous strategist. The board called me the savior. I called Noor. "It's time," I said. She understood. 2 weeks later, Chambers resigned for personal reasons. The press spun it as burnout. I spun it as stability. Within the month, I was appointed interim chairman of West Air Holdings. The pilot had wings, but I now own the sky he flew in. A week after the announcement, I sat in my new office overlooking the same runway where Ava and Liam had once posed for their perfect photo. Planes taxied below, obedient, scheduled, predictable. Everything she said I could never be. My phone vibrated again. Another message. "Ava, you really bought it." I stared at the screen for a long second before replying. "I told you, Ava. I don't lose altitude. I change airspace." That night, I stayed late, the hum of engines outside syncing with the rhythm of my thoughts. This wasn't just acquisition. It was transformation, the turning of heartbreak into infrastructure. In business, you don't fight turbulence. You learn to fly through it, to use resistance as lift. And somewhere out there, as one of my planes lifted into the night, I imagined Liam in the cockpit, confident, unknowing, steering my investment through my sky. I poured another drink, whispered to the dark glass. "Welcome aboard, Captain." Power, I learned, doesn't arrive like lightning. It seeps in quietly, an inch at a time, until suddenly everyone's looking up and you're already standing at the top. By the end of summer, West Air was no longer a struggling airline held together by cheap slogans and photogenic pilots. It was a living extension of my design, streamlined, data-driven, efficient. What once ran on image now ran on precision. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't since before Ava left. Peace. Not happiness. Happiness is fleeting, conditional. Peace is knowing you can end a storm with a phone call. I changed everything. The marketing team it used to post romantic sunset photos was now producing reports on customer yield optimization. Influencer budgets were slashed. Union negotiations were restructured with respect and math. Two things corporate America rarely combines. Employees whispered my name the way people mention weather. Unpredictable, unstoppable, inevitable. Nor became my shadow, the quiet force that translated my thoughts into results. Still, power attracts eyes. The press began calling me the ghost tycoon, the invisible investor who turned an airline around without ever giving an interview. I didn't mind the label. Ghosts don't seek attention. They haunt the people who deserve it. And one of those people was starting to feel the chill. Ava's messages grew more frequent, though still restrained. A digital pulse of curiosity she couldn't suppress. "Ava, I heard West Air's under new management." "Ava, Liam says morale is tense. Pilots feel the new guy's cutting too deep." "Ava, is that you?" For days I ignored them. Then one evening, after an investor's dinner, I finally answered. "Ethan, it's me." "Ava, why? Why would you do this?" "Ethan, because I could." There was a long pause before she sent another. "Ava, you're not the man I remember." I looked at her message for a while, then typed back, "Ethan, no, Ava, I finally am." The next week, I visited one of West Hair's maintenance hubs. I wanted to see the bones of the company, not the glossy surface, but the steel beneath it. The air smelled of hydraulic oil and rain. Mechanics moved like surgeons around the aircraft, focused, efficient. And among them, walking
Even with an
across
easy
the
swagger,
hangar, I
was Liam
recognized that
Brooks.
same self-assured grin, the posture of a man used to being adored. He didn't see me at first. Why would he? Men like him rarely look down. When he finally did, his face registered faint recognition, the kind people get when they see someone who doesn't belong in their world. He approached, extending a hand. "Hey, I'm Captain Brooks. You must be the new investor everyone's whispering about." I shook his hand firmly. "Ethan Cole." He blinked. "Wait, Ava's Ethan." I smiled slightly. "That's one way to describe me." His hand slipped from mine. "She didn't mention you were involved here." "She wouldn't," I said. "She likes her stories tidy." He forced a chuckle. "Well, small world, huh?" "Not really," I replied. "I own it now." The conversation died there, clipped, efficient, surgical. For a second, I almost pitted him. Almost. Control changes a man. It sharpens the senses, but dulls the heart. The more I built, the less I felt. Meetings, decisions, numbers, they filled the silence Ava had left behind, but not the space she'd once occupied. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk through the hangar alone. The aircraft gleamed under the floodlights, massive, obedient, grounded until I said otherwise. I'd rest a hand on the cold metal fuselage and think this is what control feels like. Cold, heavy, beautiful, nor noticed the shift before anyone else. One evening, she dropped a folder on my desk and lingered. "You've won, Ethan," she said softly. "Have I?" "Yes. The airline's profitable. The board worships you. The media calls you a visionary. But I'm starting to wonder, do you even know what you wanted anymore?" Her words landed harder than I expected. Nor had never been sentimental. "What are you implying?" "That revenge has an expiration date," she said. "And after that, all it leaves behind is ownership and emptiness." I looked at her, steady. "Then it's a good thing I'm comfortable with both." She sighed. "Maybe you are. But people like you never stay comfortable for long." She was right. Because control, once achieved, demands to be tested. When I learned that Liam was scheduled to co-pilot the West Hair PR flight to Paris, a high-profile event meant to celebrate the airline's new era of excellence, I made a decision that even nor questioned. "You're going to attend?" she asked, incredulous. "I own the airline," I said. "It would be rude not to." She studied me. "And Ava?" "Invited," I said simply, "as the guest of the captain." The day of the event, the terminal buzzed with photographers and reporters. Liam arrived in full uniform, every bit the star of the show, Ava by his side in a cream dress and her signature confidence. Polished, perfect, performative. She saw me before he did. Her expression faltered for half a second, just long enough for me to see it. Regret. I approached, calm and measured. "Ava," I said, nodding politely. "Captain." Liam's jaw tightened. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I imagine you didn't expect to see your boss either," I said evenly. Ava glanced between us. "Ethan, please don't make a scene." "A scene?" I smiled faintly. "No, this is just good business." The PR manager called for boarding, the cameras flashed, and Liam led Ava up the stairs into the plane, my plane. I stood on the tarmac, hands in my pockets, watching them disappear inside. Half an hour later, as the engines roared to life, I walked into the operations control room, the heart of West Hair's command. Screens glowed with flight data, crew communications, and every heartbeat of the sky. "Everything on schedule, Mr. Cole?" an operator asked. "Perfectly," I said. "Let's make sure it stays that way." As Flight 472 lifted off into the night, I felt no triumph, no joy, only the steady rhythm of inevitability. My hand rested on the glass as the jet climbed into the clouds, a silent metaphor for every person who had once thought they were above me. The next morning, headlines bloomed like wildfire. West Hair's new owner revealed, the billionaire behind the turnaround. Every business outlet carried my name. Photos from the event showed me standing on the tarmac, unbothered, while Liam and Ava smiled from the stairs behind. Suddenly, the narrative had shifted. She was no longer the glamorous muse of a charming pilot. She was the ex of the man who bought the sky. Her followers loved the drama. This is straight out of a movie. Imagine leaving him and he buys your man's airline, loudly crying face skull. For once, I didn't hide from the spotlight. I gave one interview, brief, surgical, designed to sting without leaving fingerprints. Business isn't personal, I told the journalist. But sometimes, personal lessons make the best business strategies. It went viral overnight. Weeks passed. The airline stabilized under my rule. The chaos quieted. But internally, I felt an unsettling calm. Nor was right. Revenge was a finite fuel. Once burned, all it left was empty air. One evening, Ava showed up at my office. No appointment, no warning, just walked past security like she still belonged. "You've made your point," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Which one?" I asked. "That you're powerful, that you can control everything, that you won." I looked at her, really looked. The same woman who once accused me of being too calm, now shaking in front of the man she'd underestimated. "You think this was about winning?" I said quietly. "No, Ava. Winning implies there was still a game. You ended that the moment you chose spectacle over substance." She blinked, eyes glistening. "Do you still love me?" The question caught me off guard, not because of what it meant, but because of how long it had been since I'd thought about love at all. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe I love what you used to be, before you started mistaking applause for affection." She swallowed hard. "Then what now?" "Now," I said, turning to the window, the city sprawling beneath us. "Now we both live with what we built." She left quietly like before, but this time I didn't watch her go. That night, I sat alone in my office as planes roared overhead, tracing invisible paths through my sky. For the first time since the beginning, I felt something shift again. Not anger, not satisfaction, but an awareness of the cost. Revenge had restored my power, but it had also rebuilt my solitude. The world thought I'd bought the airline for her, but I was starting to realize I'd bought it for myself, to prove I still existed when love didn't. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to decide what kind of man I become now that I own the air. Success feels different when there's no one left to witness it. The morning after Ava left my office, the city looked the same. Same skyline, same sound of engines cutting through the gray. Yet something inside me had shifted quietly, like the changing of pressure before a storm. For months, I had lived in a cycle of acquisition, control, and precision. I'd turned heartbreak into a blueprint and humiliation into a business model. I'd won every battle worth fighting. And yet, sitting behind my desk, overlooking the runways of West Air, I felt the unmistakable hum of emptiness. The silence that once comforted me had become heavier. Every success report Noor handed me, every congratulatory email from the board, every mention of my name in the media, it all felt like echoes in a hollow room. You could buy airspace, I realized, but you can't buy peace. It started subtly. Missed meetings, slower mornings, a detachment even Noor noticed. One afternoon, she stood in my office doorway, arms crossed, watching me stare at the skyline. "You're not here anymore," she said. "I'm right here." "Not really," she replied. "You're hovering, like one of your planes on standby. Maybe it's time to land, Ethan." She was right, though I didn't admit it then. I'd spent years mastering the art of control, but control is a lonely kingdom. It isolates, sterilizes, and slowly strips away the very chaos that once made life feel alive. That night, I didn't go home. I drove to the airfield instead, the private one, the quiet one reserved for executive flights. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the cool night air as I stood beside one of the planes. The moon reflected off its fuselage, clean and metallic, a mirror to everything I'd become. The pilot on duty approached me cautiously. "Mr. Cole, can I help you?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'm just making sure everything's still running." He nodded, unsure whether I meant the plane or myself. The next morning, I boarded a West Air flight for the first time as a passenger. No entourage, no announcement, Just me, a boarding pass, and a first-class seat under an alias. The attendants didn't know who I was. The pilot's name flashed briefly on the welcome screen, Captain Liam Brooks. Of course, fate has a cruel sense of humor. As the plane taxied and lifted off, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not irony, but closure. Watching Liam's voice come through the cabin speakers, confident and practiced, I realized he'd become exactly what he was meant to be, a pilot. Nothing more, nothing less. Ava had chosen him for his wings. I had bought the sky, but both of us, in our own ways, had been running from gravity. I stared out the window, the clouds glowing gold under the sunrise, and for the first time, I didn't think about control. I thought about surrender, not to someone else, but to life itself. The kind of surrender that says, I've done enough. It's time to breathe again. When the plane landed, I didn't go back to headquarters. I went to the lake house, the place I hadn't visited since before everything began. The house was quiet, dust layered on the furniture, as if time itself had been waiting for me to return. I walked out to the dock, the water still and dark, reflecting the sky. It was here, years ago, that I'd once promised Ava forever. It was here, too, that I'd first learned what it meant to lose her. Now it was just me, and the reflection of a man I barely recognized. For days, I stayed at the lake house, disconnected from the world, nor managed the company in my absence, sending only one-line updates, all stable. Take your time. And I did. I read books I hadn't touched in years. I cooked my own meals. I walked through the woods until my phone lost signal and silence felt natural again. Slowly, the armor I'd built began to soften. One evening, I sat on the dock with a glass of whiskey when headlights cut through the trees. A familiar car door closed, and a softer voice followed. Figured I'd find you here, Nurse said, walking up with her usual calm. I didn't look at her right away. You tracking me now? She smiled. Please. You're predictable, Cole. Am I? Painfully, she said. Then, after a pause, she came to see me. That got my attention. Ava. Nor nodded. She wanted to thank you. I laughed quietly. For ruining her life? For forcing her to rebuild it, Nurse said. She's working with a small PR firm now. Low-key, quiet clients. I no didn't filters, nor sat no beside me. The wood said it feels real again. You did what you had to, she said. But maybe it's time to stop defining yourself by what broke you. I turned to her, curious. And define myself by what? By what you build next, not what you burn. Her words lingered long after she left. When I finally returned to the city, West Terre was thriving. Nor had handled operations flawlessly. The airline's reputation had shifted from scandal to success. Employees respected the structure. Customers trusted the brand. But I was done. In the next board meeting, I announced my decision. I'm stepping down as chairman, I said simply. Effective immediately. The room went silent. One of the directors protested. Ethan, you can't just walk away. The company needs you. I smiled faintly. Then I've done my job right. Nur caught my eye across the table. No surprise there, only quiet understanding. Within weeks, the transition was official. I retained a minority stake, enough to ensure stability, but not enough to hold me captive. I sold the rest to a private equity group that promised to maintain the new structure. And for the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for anyone's flight plan but my own. A month later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a postcard, a photo of a beach, a handwriting I knew too well. Thank you, Ethan, for teaching me that love without respect is turbulence waiting to happen. I hope you're flying again for yourself this time. Ava. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer of my desk at the lake house. Not as a keepsake, but as closure. Outside, the sound of an airplane drifted through the evening air, distant, steady, free. Weeks turned into months. I began traveling, not for business, not to conquer, but to simply experience motion again. I flew commercial, sometimes even with West Terre. The irony no longer bothered me. Every time I boarded, I'd smile faintly at the logo, my old kingdom, now flying without me. In one of those flights, a flight attendant handed me a drink with a knowing smile. First time with us. I met her eyes and said no, but it feels like it. She laughed softly. Then welcome aboard anyway. As the plane lifted through the clouds, I looked out the window, not at the city shrinking below, not at the horizon ahead, but at the quiet space in between. That's where real flight happens, between control and surrender, between loss and freedom. People often ask what it feels like to buy an airline. The truth? It's not about the ownership. It's about what it costs you to get there. For me, it cost the illusion that power could heal the heart. It cost the woman I thought I needed and the man I used to be. But it also gave me something rarer, perspective, the understanding that altitude means nothing if you've forgotten how to land. And as I watched the clouds drift by, I whispered, not to her, not to the past, but to the sky itself. I'm done chasing storms. I'm just here to fly.